He never raised his voice. He didn't flaunt his degrees, and yet when he spoke, everyone listened. You've probably met someone like that. The kind of man who doesn't need to prove his intelligence because it's written in how he moves, how he listens, how he speaks, or chooses not to. See, truly intelligent men have a superpower. It's not in knowing all the answers. It's in knowing what not to say. In this video, we'll uncover the 7 phrases smart men avoid not because they're weak, but because they've learned the cost of careless words. The ego trap of "I already know that." The invisible chains of "that's just how I am." The silent regret behind "I'll do it later." Say the wrong thing and you sabotage your future. Choose silence and you build power. Which man are you becoming? There's a phrase that slips out of a man's mouth more often than he realizes. I already know that. At first, it sounds confident, smart even, but underneath it reveals something else entirely. A closed door, a mind no longer open to learning. An intelligent man knows better. He understands that the moment you convince yourself there's nothing left to learn, you stop growing. You shut out insight. You silence the world before it even speaks. I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I was in a meeting with a mentor, an older man with the kind of calm presence that only comes from surviving decades of real-life battles. He started explaining a process I'd done 100 times. I cut him off. "Yeah, I know that already." He paused, said nothing, but the weight of that silence hit me harder than any lecture could. Later that night, I realized what I'd done. I didn't just interrupt him, I robbed myself. I missed a chance to learn something from a man who had seen things I hadn't. Things no manual, no tutorial, no algorithm could teach. What I said wasn't confidence. It was ego dressed up like knowledge. It's easy to pretend we're already experts. It's harder to admit we're still students, but that's where real intelligence begins. The Stoics warned us long ago, you cannot learn anything if you think you already know everything. True wisdom lies in curiosity, in humility. I once watched a master carpenter let a young apprentice explain a technique he had surely mastered 30 years ago. He nodded, asked questions, even thanked him for sharing. Later I asked why he didn't just say, "I know." He smiled and said, "Because sometimes the way they see it teaches me something I forgot." That's wisdom. That's leadership. That's intelligence that doesn't need to announce itself. So the next time you hear something familiar, pause. Listen anyway. Not to be polite, but because one sentence, one word, could shift your perspective. And even if it doesn't, you've still practiced humility. And that practice over time makes you the kind of man others want to follow. Because the smartest men are still students. They're still listening. And they never say, "I already know that." That's impossible. 2 words that sound like logic, but often hide fear. I used to work with a man named Robert, sharp, respected. He carried the weight of the company like it was stitched into his suit. But anytime someone brought up a bold idea, a new market, a risky pitch, a better way to do things, he'd shake his head and say, "That's impossible." At first I thought it was wisdom. He was being cautious, strategic, responsible. But over time I realized it wasn't the world he doubted. It was himself. Those 2 words didn't stop bad ideas. They stopped growth. They weren't a verdict on the situation. They were a reflection of his limits. He wasn't evaluating risk, he was avoiding uncertainty. And that's not intelligence, that's fear disguised as reason. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. Seneca once said we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and he was right. Most of the time when a man says, "That's impossible," he's just saying, "I'm scared." Scared to be wrong, scared to try, scared to fall short. But intelligent men know something different. They know that obstacles are not walls, they're invitations. They don't need to know how the entire journey ends. They just need to take the first step. I remember a project I worked on, tight deadline, tiny budget, and a team that barely knew each other. Everything in my mind told me it wouldn't work. But instead of saying, "That's impossible," I asked a better question. What can I do today? What's the next step? Not the finish line, just one step. And then another, and then another. 6 weeks later, we delivered one of the best campaigns of my career, not because we did the impossible, but because we refused to freeze. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And that's the difference. An intelligent man focuses on what he can control. He understands that most limits are mental. Most walls are made of fear. And when he hears that's impossible, he doesn't retreat. He leans in. Because courage isn't loud. It's persistent. It shows up when the odds are bad and the path isn't clear. And that's the kind of strength no one can teach you. You build it by showing up anyway, especially when it's hard, especially when it's uncertain, especially when everyone else says, "That's impossible." That's not my fault. It's one of the easiest phrases to say and one of the most dangerous, because every time a man says it, he gives away something far more valuable than blame. He gives away control. I once knew a man named Michael, smart, charismatic, incredibly driven. He lost a major client after a tough quarter. The moment it happened, he had a list ready. The market shifted. The client was unreasonable. His team dropped the ball. And sure, some of that was true. But while he was explaining why it wasn't his fault, he missed the chance to ask, "What could I have done differently?" And that question, just that one, could have changed everything. You see, intelligent men know that responsibility isn't about guilt. It's about power. Because when you refuse to take ownership, you wait. You wait for others to fix it. You wait for someone to apologize. You wait for change. But when you own even a small part of the problem, you take back the wheel. You shift from victim to leader, from reaction to action. The Stoics were obsessed with this principle. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters." In every failure, in every setback, there's always something within your reach, and intelligent men focus on that. When I look back at my own mistakes, the big ones, the ones that burned, the turning point was always the same. The moment I stopped pointing fingers and started asking better questions. Maybe I didn't explain things clearly. Maybe I waited too long. Maybe I assumed instead of verifying. Even when others made bigger mistakes, taking responsibility shifted something inside me. It made me sharper. It earned trust. It gave me momentum. Because people follow the man who owns his path, not the one who hides from it. Blame is easy, but it keeps you stuck. Responsibility. That's where transformation begins. It's the moment you stop saying, "That's not my fault," and start saying, "What's my role in this and what do I do now?" That's intelligence. That's strength. That's leadership in motion. I don't need any help. It sounds noble. It sounds strong, but it's a lie. A dangerous one. A lie that isolates. A lie that breaks men slowly. And the worst part, we've been taught to believe it's a virtue. We admire the lone wolf. The man who carries everything on his own. The one who never complains, never breaks, never bends. But here's the truth. Even steel has a breaking point. Even kings fall if they stand alone too long. The strongest men I've ever known, they didn't stand alone. They knew when to reach out. They knew when to ask. I remember reading about Abraham Lincoln during the darkest days of the Civil War. History paints him as stoic, solitary, a man burdened by a fractured nation. But what most people forget is this: Lincoln surrounded himself with people who disagreed with him. He wanted to be challenged. He sought out conflicting opinions. Not because he lacked confidence, but because he had the courage to admit he didn't have all the answers. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's power wrapped in humility. I had to learn this lesson the hard way. There was a time when I tried to carry it all: work, family, pressure. I thought asking for help meant I was failing. I kept it in, and it wore me down. The turning point came the day I finally admitted to someone I trusted I'm struggling. What I found wasn't judgment. It was relief, support, clarity. That one moment of honesty gave me back months of energy I didn't know I'd lost. The Stoics believed we are all part of something greater. We're not built to carry life alone. We are made for cooperation, for shared burdens, for lifting each other. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, openly thanked his teachers, his friends, his mentors. If he didn't pretend to be self-sufficient, why should we? Refusing help doesn't make you strong. It makes you brittle. It turns a man into a fortress with no gates, and eventually the walls collapse. Intelligent men understand this. They know that asking for help takes strength. It takes honesty. It takes courage, the kind of courage that builds real resilience. So the next time you whisper, "I've got this, I don't need anyone," pause. Ask yourself, is that strength speaking or pride in disguise? I'm too old for that. It sounds innocent, sometimes even funny, but underneath it's not a joke. It's resignation. It's the moment a man decides his best days are behind him. And that quiet surrender, it's far more dangerous than failure. Because it doesn't happen with drama. It happens slowly, one excuse at a time, one missed opportunity, one closed door locked from the inside. But intelligent men know the truth. Age doesn't limit potential, only mindset does. I once read about a man named Harry Bernstein. He published his first book at 96, not a typo, 96. After a full life working, raising a family, surviving hardship, he decided it wasn't too late. He wrote a memoir called The Invisible Wall. Publishers rejected it, over and over. But he kept going, and when it finally hit the shelves, it touched the world, translated into multiple languages, critically acclaimed. And Harry, he didn't stop. He wrote 3 more books, all after the age of 96. He didn't believe the lie. He didn't say, "I'm too old." He said, "I still have something to say." That's what intelligent men do. They don't measure their lives by years, but by purpose, by fire, by what's still inside them that hasn't yet been shared. The Stoics echoed this mindset. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, death is inevitable, but until it comes, live, fully, with urgency, with virtue, with intention. I've seen men in their 60s start businesses, men in their 70s train their bodies, men in their 80s mentor the next generation, and I've seen men in their 40s give up, not because they were old, but because they believed they were. It's not the calendar that closes the chapter. It's your voice telling you it's too late. But here's the thing. As long as you're breathing, there's still a line left to write, a lesson left to teach, a risk worth taking. And intelligent men, they never stop growing, they never stop showing up, because they understand wisdom doesn't end. It ripens, it deepens, and when the world says you've had your time, they smile and answer, "I'm just getting started." That's just how I am. It sounds definitive, like a period at the end of a sentence, but really it's an excuse, a quiet way of saying I've given up on growing. And intelligent men never say that, because they understand we are not fixed. We are not statues made of stone. We are stories, and stories evolve. I once knew a man who lost his temper all the time. When people confronted him, he shrugged and said, "That's just how I am," as if anger was in his blood, as if change was impossible. But here's the truth, it wasn't his nature, it was his habit. Another man I met avoided real relationships. Whenever someone got too close, he'd pull back. And when asked why, he'd say, "I've always been like this." But again, that wasn't identity, that was fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being vulnerable. The Stoics never accepted the idea that a man is stuck. They taught that self-mastery is the highest calling, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Epictetus said it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. In other words, it's not who you are that holds you back, it's what you believe about who you are. Change is uncomfortable, it demands honesty. It demands that we stop hiding behind old versions of ourselves. But intelligent men do it anyway, not because they hate who they are, but because they respect themselves enough not to stay the same. They ask the harder questions, am I acting this way because it's truly who I am, or because it's easier than doing the work to change? That's the line, right there, between comfort and growth, between excuse and evolution, between the man you've been and the man you could become. That's just how I am is the door shutting. But intelligent men keep the door open. They know that life is change, that nature is change, and to resist it is to slowly die while still alive. So, no, you're not just that way, you're choosing that way, but you can choose again. And that choice, that's where real freedom begins. I'll do it later. It sounds harmless, rational, even responsible. But behind those 4 words are missed opportunities, unsaid apologies, unfinished dreams. Later is the most dangerous word a man can use because it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like a promise. But more often than not, it becomes a graveyard where our best intentions quietly go to die. I once knew a man named Thomas. He was successful by every definition. He had a thriving business, a beautiful home, a respected name. But he kept putting off one thing: time with his father. They had planned a fishing trip. He postponed it. They scheduled a visit. He delayed again, always too busy, always saying, "I'll call tomorrow, I'll go next week." Until one day tomorrow didn't come. His father passed suddenly. No goodbye, no last moment, just silence. And Thomas was left with a phone full of messages he never sent, and a heart full of words he never said. He told me this not to seek sympathy, but to warn me, and I never forgot it. Because I've been there too. pushing off hard conversations, delaying big decisions, waiting for the perfect time. But here's what the Stoics knew, and what intelligent men understand. Perfect time, it doesn't exist. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. A reminder that time isn't ours. We don't control how much we get, we only control how we use it. Intelligent men act now, they make the call. They start the book. They say the words. Not because they're impulsive, but because they understand delay is a silent thief. It steals joy. It steals growth. It steals closure. I've had moments when I finally acted, wrote the letter, took the risk, made the change. And when I did, the weight lifted, regret dissolved, and clarity returned. Because action, not intention, is what builds a life worth remembering. So the next time you hear yourself say, "I'll do it later," stop, breathe, and ask, what if later never comes? Then do it now. Even if it's messy, even if it's uncomfortable, because now is all you ever truly have. So now you've heard them 7 phrases intelligent men avoid, not because they're perfect, not because they never fall into old habits, but because they've made a choice to be more, to speak less, to think deeper, and to live on purpose. I already know that. That's impossible. That's not my fault. I don't need any help. I'm too old for that. I'll do it later. That's just how I am. If any of those sounded familiar, you're not alone. I've said them too. We all have. But awareness is where change begins. You're not here because you're flawless. You're here because you're ready to grow. And that right there is intelligence in its purest form. The willingness to reflect, to evolve, to choose a different path even when it's harder. Stoic philosophy doesn't promise you comfort, it promises you clarity, and the clarity is this: you have power over your mind, over your words, over the man you become. So start today, speak with intention, lead with humility, live with urgency, and remember, wisdom isn't about being right. It's about being ready to do what's right even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it is. If this message spoke to you, pass it on. Share it with a brother, a friend, a father, a son. Because the journey toward becoming better always begins with awareness and continues with action. Thanks for watching. Now go live it.